Marcus Thompson had always been different from the other kids at Jefferson High School. While his classmates talked about their father's corporate jobs or their mother's careers in real estate, Marcus remained quiet about his family. His clothes were always clean but clearly from discount stores, and his sneakers had seen better days. At 17, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that some mistook for arrogance, but those who looked closer could see the weight he carried on his shoulders. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of the school cafeteria as Marcus sat alone at his usual table in the corner. He unwrapped the peanut butter sandwich he had made himself that morning, trying to ignore the loud conversation happening 3 tables away. Jake Morrison and his crew were holding court as usual, their designer backpacks scattered around them like territorial markers. "Did you guys see what Thompson wore to the dance last week?" Jake's voice carried across the room with practiced cruelty. "I think that suit belonged to his grandfather. Maybe his great-grandfather." The laughter that followed was sharp and cutting, designed to wound. Marcus took a careful bite of his sandwich and kept his eyes on his worn paperback copy of The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. He had found it at a used bookstore and had been reading it slowly, savoring each page. The stories of soldiers and their burdens resonated with him in ways he couldn't fully explain. "Hey Marcus," Jake called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Come sit with us, man. We want to hear about your mom again." The cafeteria seemed to quiet down, sensing drama. Marcus felt his jaw clench, but he didn't look up from his book. He had learned long ago that engaging with Jake only made things worse. The boy had a talent for finding exactly the right words to cut deep. "What's wrong, Thompson? Cat got your tongue?" This came from Tyler Chen, Jake's lieutenant in the hierarchy of high school cruelty. "Or are you embarrassed because your mom's probably at home right now, waiting for her next government check?" Marcus's fingers tightened around the edges of his book. These kids had no idea what they were talking about. They saw his mother's old car, heard whispers about their modest apartment, and filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. They didn't know about the nightmares that sometimes woke her in the middle of the night, or the way she sometimes stared at nothing for minutes at a time, lost in memories she couldn't share. "I bet she's one of those welfare queens my dad talks about," Jake continued, emboldened by his audience's attention. "Living off hard-working taxpayers while real Americans struggle." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, but he forced himself to remain still. His mother had taught him that some fights weren't worth having, that some people weren't worth the energy it took to correct them. But it was getting harder to remember that lesson with each passing day. Sarah Mitchell, who sat 2 tables over, glanced at Marcus with something that might have been sympathy. She was one of the few students who had never joined in the mockery, though she had never defended him either. Marcus didn't blame her for that. High school was its own battlefield, and everyone was just trying to survive. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Marcus carefully placed his book in his backpack and stood up, his movements deliberate and controlled. As he walked past Jake's table, the boy stuck out his foot in a move so casual it might have been accidental. Marcus stumbled slightly but caught himself, his face burning with embarrassment as snickers erupted around him. "Oops," Jake said with mock innocence. "Sorry about that, Thompson. Maybe if you weren't so focused on that boring book, you'd watch where you were going." Marcus straightened up and looked directly at Jake for the first time. The other boy was tall and athletic, with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to worry about money or fitting in. His hair was perfectly styled, his clothes expensive, his smile practiced and cold. "No problem," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Accidents happen." Jake's smile faltered slightly at Marcus's calm response, but he recovered quickly. "That's the spirit, Thompson. Always look on the bright side, right? Even when your whole life is basically one big accident." The laughter that followed was cruel and sharp, but Marcus had already turned away. He walked toward his next class with his head held high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. But, inside, something was cracking. The constant mockery, the daily humiliations, the way other students looked through him like he was invisible, it was all building toward something he couldn't quite name. In advanced placement history, Marcus slumped in his seat near the back of the room. Mrs. Rodriguez was discussing the Vietnam War, talking about the soldiers who came home to a country that didn't understand what they had sacrificed. Marcus found himself thinking about his mother again, about the medal she kept in a small box in her bedroom drawer. She had shown it to him once, when he was younger, and asked about the scar on her shoulder. "Your mother served her country," Mrs. Rodriguez was saying, though she was talking to the class in general. "These men and women gave years of their lives, faced dangers most of us can't imagine, and many of them struggled to readjust when they came home. We owe them our respect and gratitude." Marcus wondered what his classmates would think if they knew his mother had been one of those soldiers. Would it change anything? Would Jake Morrison still mock her if he knew she had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, earning commendations for bravery under fire? Probably not. People like Jake only saw what they wanted to see. After school, Marcus waited by the flagpole for his mother to pick him up. Their old Honda Civic was reliable but showed its age, and he sometimes caught other students smirking when they saw it. Today, he was too tired to care. The accumulation of small cruelties had worn him down, leaving him feeling hollow and defeated. When his mother pulled up, Marcus studied her face through the windshield. Elena Thompson was 42 years old, with prematurely gray hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her face was lean and serious, marked by lines that spoke of responsibility and hardship rather than age. She wore her usual uniform of jeans and a simple t-shirt, clothes that were practical rather than fashionable. "How was school?" she asked as Marcus climbed into the passenger seat. It was their daily ritual, the same question asked with the same gentle concern. "Fine," Marcus replied, giving her the same answer he always gave. He had never told her about Jake Morrison or the daily humiliations he endured. She had enough to worry about without adding his problems to the list. Elena studied her son's face for a moment, noting the tension in his jaw and the way he avoided her eyes. She had seen that look before, in the mirror after particularly difficult days. But she also knew better than to push when he wasn't ready to talk. They drove home in comfortable silence, passing through neighborhoods that gradually became less affluent as they moved away from the school district's wealthy center. Their apartment complex was clean but modest, filled with families who worked multiple jobs and counted every dollar. Elena had chosen it specifically because it was in the Jefferson High School district, determined to give her son the best education possible regardless of their financial circumstances. That evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table doing homework, Elena watched him from the corner of her eye while she prepared dinner. She had sacrificed a lot to give him opportunities, working as a night shift security guard to pay for his school supplies and the occasional new book. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and allowed her to be home during the day when Marcus needed her. She thought about the conversation she had overheard that morning when she dropped him off at school. 2 mothers had been discussing their son's college plans, talking casually about SAT prep courses that cost more than Elena made in a month. She had felt a familiar pang of worry about Marcus's future, wondering if her best efforts would be enough to level the playing field. "Mom?" Marcus's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you ever regret it? The choices you made, I mean." Elena set down her spatula and turned to face him fully. The question caught her off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Marcus was 17 now, old enough to understand that their life was different from most of his classmates' lives. "What do you mean, exactly?" Marcus struggled to find the words. How could he explain that he sometimes felt like a burden, that he knew their modest lifestyle was the result of choices she had made to put his needs first? How could he tell her that other kids looked down on both of them without making her feel like she had failed him? "I just wonder sometimes if things might have been different. Easier, maybe." Elena walked over to the table and sat down across from him. She reached out and covered his hand with hers, noting how much he had grown in the past year. He was taller than her now, but in moments like this, she could still see the little boy who used to curl up in her lap when thunderstorms scared him. "Marcus, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Every choice I've made, every sacrifice, every difficult decision, it was all worth it because it brought me to this moment, sitting here with you. You are not a burden or a mistake or anything you need to apologize for.
you are the best thing that ever happened to me."
Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. He wanted to tell her about Jake Morrison, about the daily humiliations and the way other students treated him like he was less than nothing. But, looking at her tired face, seeing the love and determination in her eyes, he couldn't bring himself to add to her worries. "I love you too, Mom," he said instead. That night, Marcus lay in his narrow bed staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls of their apartment, he could hear Mrs. Garcia's television and the sound of Mr. Kim coming home from his evening shift at the factory. These were good people, hard-working people, but Marcus knew that none of his classmates lived in places like this. He thought about the college applications sitting on his desk, filled out but not yet submitted. His grades were excellent, but he worried that wouldn't be enough. Students like Jake Morrison had advantages that went beyond money, connections, legacy admissions, the kind of social capital that opened doors Marcus didn't even know existed. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Marcus made a decision. He was tired of being ashamed, tired of hiding who he was and where he came from. Tomorrow would be different somehow, though he wasn't sure yet what that would mean. All he knew was that he couldn't keep living in the shadows, apologizing for his existence and hoping to become invisible. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching Marcus's mood as he walked through the school's front entrance. He had spent most of the night thinking about his conversation with his mother, about the weight of unspoken truths that seemed to grow heavier each day. As he made his way to his locker, he noticed the usual clusters of students gathered in their social groups, their conversations flowing easily around topics he couldn't relate to. Jake Morrison was already holding court near the trophy case, regaling his followers with some story that involved dramatic hand gestures and loud laughter. Marcus tried to slip past unnoticed, but Jake's attention was like a spotlight that somehow always found him. Well, if it isn't our favorite charity case," Jake called out, his voice carrying that familiar tone of mock affection that made Marcus's skin crawl.
"How's the family business, Thompson? Still living off the kindness of strangers?" This time, something was different. Instead of the usual knot of shame and anger in his stomach, Marcus felt a strange calm settling over him. He stopped walking and turned to face Jake directly, studying the other boy's face with new eyes. What he saw there wasn't strength or confidence, but something smaller and more pathetic, the desperate need to tear others down in order to feel important. "My family's doing just fine," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a note of steel that surprised even him.
"Thanks for asking." Jake's eyebrows shot up in surprise. This wasn't the usual script, and, for a moment he seemed unsure how to respond. Then, his smile sharpened, becoming more predatory. "Oh, really? Because my dad was just saying how he sees your mom driving that beat-up car to her night security job.
Funny how some people call that doing fine."
The words hit their mark, but, instead of crumbling, Marcus felt something straighten inside him. His mother worked night security because it paid better than day shifts, and she did it without complaint to provide for their family. There was nothing shameful about honest work, no matter what Jake Morrison's privileged worldview suggested. "Your dad seems to pay a lot of attention to my mother's schedule," Marcus replied evenly.
"That's interesting."
A few students had started to gather, sensing confrontation in the air. Jake's face flushed slightly at the implication, but he pressed on with the cruelty that had always served him well. "Look, Thompson, I'm just trying to help you understand your place here. Some of us belong at Jefferson High, and others." He gestured vaguely at Marcus's thrift store clothes and worn backpack.
"Others are here because of geographical accidents. And what exactly makes you think you belong here more than I do?"
Marcus asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. The question seemed to catch Jake off guard. He was used to insults and defensive responses, not calm interrogation.
"My family has been part of this community for generations.
My grandfather helped build half the businesses in this town.
We contribute." "Contribute how, exactly? By inheriting money and looking down on people who actually work for a living?"
A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the group, her eyes wide with surprise at Marcus's newfound boldness.
Even Tyler Chin seemed uncertain, glancing between Jake and Marcus as if watching a tennis match. Jake's composure was starting to crack. Listen, you little, no, you listen.
Marcus stepped closer, his voice still quiet but carrying an authority that made everyone lean in to hear him.
I'm tired of your games. I'm tired of pretending that your opinion of me or my family matters. You want to know the truth?
My mother has done more for this country in one day than you'll do in your entire privileged life.
What's that supposed to mean?
Marcus hesitated for just a moment. He had never talked about his mother's service at school, partly to protect her privacy and partly because he knew students like Jake would find a way to twist it into something ugly. But, standing there, surrounded by his classmates' curious faces, he realized that his silence had protected no one. It means she's a veteran.
3 tours in Afghanistan. Bronze Star.
Purple Heart. She spent 4 years putting her life on the line for people like you, and now she works night security to put me through school because she believes education matters. The silence that followed was profound. Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his usual arsenal of insults suddenly inadequate. Several students shifted uncomfortably, as if seeing Marcus clearly for the first time.
That's...
Jake started, then stopped, clearly struggling to process this new information.
That doesn't change anything. I mean, so what if she was in the army?
Plenty of people join the military because they can't do anything else. The words hung in the air like a physical slap. Even Jake's usual supporters looked uncomfortable now, sensing that he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Marcus felt something cold and dangerous unfurl in his chest.
Can't do anything else?
Marcus repeated softly. She earned a degree in electrical engineering before she enlisted. She chose to serve. And, when she came back, she chose to work security so she could be home during the day when I got back from school. Every choice she's made has been about sacrifice and service, which are concepts you clearly don't understand. Jake's face had gone red, but whether from embarrassment or anger was unclear.
You don't know what you're talking about, Thompson.
Your family has money, Marcus interrupted.
That's not the same thing as having character.
The bell rang, signaling the start of first period, but nobody moved. The confrontation had taken on a gravity that transcended normal high school drama, touching on questions of worth and dignity that most teenagers weren't equipped to navigate. Principal Williams appeared at the edge of the crowd, his presence immediately dispersing the gathered students. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carrying the tired authority of someone who had broken up countless teenage disputes. "Nothing, sir," Jake said quickly, his earlier bravado evaporating in the face of adult supervision.
Just a misunderstanding. Marcus?
Principal Williams looked at him expectantly. Marcus glanced around at the dispersing crowd, noting the curious glances and whispered conversations that would follow him for the rest of the day. He had wanted to make a statement, to stand up for himself and his mother, but now he wasn't sure what he had accomplished. "No problem here, Mr. Williams," he said finally.
"Just a discussion about military service." Principal Williams studied both boys for a moment, clearly sensing undercurrents he couldn't quite identify. "Well, let's keep our discussion civil, gentlemen. And, let's get to class."
As the crowd dispersed, Marcus found himself walking beside Sarah Mitchell toward their shared AP English class. She had never spoken to him directly before, and he wasn't sure what to expect. "That was brave," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear.
"What you said about your mom. Was it?"
Marcus wasn't sure brave was the word he would use.
"Reckless, maybe. Overdue, certainly."
Jake Morrison has been the king of this school for so long, nobody ever calls him out on his garbage.
It was about time someone did.
They walked in silence for a moment before Sarah spoke again.
"My uncle was in Iraq. Marines.
He doesn't talk about it much, but I know it was hard.
Really hard. It makes me angry when people act like military service doesn't mean anything."
Marcus nodded, feeling an unexpected connection to this girl he had barely noticed before.
"Most people don't understand what it costs."
"Your mom sounds amazing." "She is," Marcus said simply. In English class, Marcus tried to focus on Mrs. Peterson's discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird, but his mind kept drifting to the confrontation with Jake. He had crossed a line today, revealed something personal that he had kept hidden for years. There would be consequences, he was sure of that. Jake Morrison wasn't the type to let a public humiliation go unanswered. During lunch, Marcus noticed the change immediately. Students looked at him differently now, some with newfound respect, others with the kind of curiosity reserved for exotic animals. Jake's usual table was engaged in animated conversation that stopped whenever Marcus walked past. He could feel the weight of their attention like a physical presence. He sat at his usual table in the corner, unwrapping another peanut butter sandwich and opening his book. But concentration was impossible with so many eyes on him. After a few minutes, Sarah Mitchell approached his table, carrying her lunch tray with obvious nervousness. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him, surprised by the gesture. Sarah had never shown any interest in socializing with him before, though she had never been cruel either. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," she began, settling into her seat. "About your mom being a veteran. I had no idea. Most people don't. I don't usually talk about it." "Why not? I mean, that's something to be proud of, right?" Marcus considered the question. Why hadn't he talked about his mother's service? Partly it was respect for her privacy, but if he was honest with himself, there was more to it than that. "I guess I was worried people would use it against us somehow," he admitted. "Like they'd assume she was damaged or unstable or something. People have a lot of stereotypes about veterans." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's really sad. The stereotypes, I mean. People should know the truth about what military families sacrifice." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Marcus found himself studying Sarah's face, noticing details he had missed during their years of shared classes. She had kind eyes and an earnest expression that suggested she thought carefully before speaking. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah said finally. Marcus tensed slightly, but nodded. "Do you think Jake Morrison will let this go? What happened this morning, I mean?" It was a good question, one that had been nagging at Marcus all day. Jake wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of an audience. His entire social status depended on his ability to dominate others, and Marcus had just proved that the emperor had no clothes. "Probably not," Marcus admitted. "But I'm tired of living in fear of him. If he wants to escalate things, that's his choice." Sarah looked worried. "Just be careful, okay? Jake has a lot of friends, and some of them aren't as smart as they think they are. Sometimes people do stupid things when they feel threatened." The warning proved prophetic. That afternoon, as Marcus walked to his locker after the final bell, he found it had been vandalized. Someone had written "Welfare Brat" in permanent marker across the metal surface, along with several other insults that made his face burn with shame and anger. A small crowd had gathered to stare at the graffiti, their expressions ranging from curiosity to sympathy to barely concealed glee. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of their attention like a physical blow. This was Jake's response to the morning's confrontation, a public humiliation designed to put Marcus back in his place. "That's messed up," someone muttered behind him. "Who would do something like that?" another voice asked, though the question was clearly rhetorical. Marcus forced himself to move, opening his locker and gathering his books with hands that trembled slightly from suppressed rage. The words on his locker were bad enough, but the public nature of the humiliation made it 10 times worse. Everyone would see it, everyone would know that someone thought he was worth so little that they could deface his property without consequence. As he closed his locker and turned to leave, Marcus came face to face with Jake Morrison. The other boy was standing just close enough to make it clear he had been watching, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's terrible," Jake said with mock sympathy. "I can't imagine who would do such a thing. Some people have no respect for other people's property." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, memorizing the satisfied gleam in Jake's eyes. This wasn't just cruelty anymore, it was warfare.
And Marcus was starting to realize that he had been fighting with one hand tied behind his back. "You're right," Marcus said finally, his voice calm despite the storm raging inside him. "Some people have no respect at all." He walked away without another word, leaving Jake standing beside the vandalized locker with his small, cruel smile. But, as Marcus pushed through the school's front doors, he was already making plans. The time for passive resistance was over. If Jake Morrison wanted a war, Marcus would give him one he would never forget. Marcus spent the entire ride home staring out the passenger window, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Elena glanced at him several times, noting the tension radiating from her son like heat from a furnace. She had picked him up from school thousands of times over the years, and she could read his moods like a weather forecast. Today's storm was different, darker and more dangerous than anything she had seen before. "Rough day?" she asked gently, giving him an opening to talk without pushing too hard. Marcus turned to look at his mother, really look at her, for the first time in months. He saw the gray hair that had started appearing after her second tour in Afghanistan, the slight scar on her left temple from shrapnel that had nearly killed her, the way she held her left shoulder slightly higher than her right because of an injury that still bothered her in cold weather. This was a woman who had survived firefights and roadside bombs, who had earned the respect of hardened soldiers and saved lives under impossible conditions. And Jake Morrison thought she was worthless. "Mom," he said carefully, "tell me about Afghanistan." Elena's hands tightened on the steering wheel almost imperceptibly. She had always been willing to answer Marcus's questions about her service, but he rarely asked anymore. Something in his tone told her this wasn't idle curiosity. "What do you want to know, sweetheart?" "Everything. The real stuff. Not the sanitized version you tell at school events." They had reached their apartment complex, but Elena didn't immediately turn off the engine. Instead, she sat in the parking lot, choosing her words carefully. Afghanistan was... She paused, searching for words that could convey the complexity of her experience without traumatizing her son. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the most important. We were there to help people, to protect villages that had been terrorized for decades. But it came at a cost." "What kind of cost?" Elena studied her son's face, seeing something new in his expression. There was an intensity there, a hunger for truth that hadn't been there before. "The cost of seeing things no person should have to see. Of making decisions that kept you awake at night for years afterward. Of watching good people die for causes they believed in." She turned to face him fully. "Why are you asking, Marcus?" Marcus told her everything then. About Jake Morrison and the daily humiliations, about the graffiti on his locker and the way other students looked at him like he was less than human. He told her about the constant shame he carried, the way he had learned to make himself invisible to avoid attracting attention. Most painfully, he told her about the assumptions people made about her, about their family, about their worth as human beings. Elena listened without interrupting, her face growing progressively more serious as the story unfolded. When Marcus finished, they sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the gentle hum of the car's engine. "You've been carrying this alone all this time?" she asked finally. "I didn't want to worry you. You work so hard already, and I know money is tight, and I just thought, Marcus." Her voice cut through his explanation like a blade. "Look at me." He did, seeing something in her eyes that reminded him she had once been a soldier. "Do you remember what I taught you about bullies when you were little? That they pick on people they think won't fight back." "That's right. And what happens when you prove them wrong?" Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. "They usually back down." Elena nodded slowly. "Your friend Jake Morrison has never met anyone like me, has he?" The way she said friend made it clear she understood exactly what kind of person Jake was. There was something almost predatory in her tone, the voice of someone who had faced down armed insurgents and lived to tell about it. "Mom, what are you thinking?" Elena smiled then, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "I'm thinking it's time I met some of your classmates' parents. Starting with Jake Morrison's." That evening, Elena made several phone calls.
She spoke to Principal Williams, to Jake's father at his real estate office, and to the president of the Parent-Teacher Association. Her tone was unfailingly polite, but there was steel underneath the courtesy that brooked no argument. By the time she finished, she had arranged a meeting for the following afternoon. Marcus watched his mother work with growing amazement. This was a side of her he had never seen before, the tactical commander who had once coordinated supply missions through hostile territory. She approached the problem of Jake Morrison with the same methodical precision she had once used to plan military operations.
"What exactly are you planning?"
Marcus asked as she hung up the phone. "I'm going to educate some people about respect," she said simply.
"And about the consequences of disrespecting a military family."
The next day at school, word spread quickly that something unusual was happening. Jake Morrison seemed unusually quiet during morning classes, and there were whispers about a mysterious meeting that had been called for after school. Marcus tried to focus on his classes, but anticipation made concentration nearly impossible. At 3:30, Marcus made his way to the main office, where he found a small crowd gathered. Principal Williams was there, looking official and slightly uncomfortable. Jake Morrison sat beside his father, Richard Morrison, a tall man in an expensive suit who looked like an older, softer version of his son. Several other parents Marcus didn't recognize were scattered around the room, their faces reflecting varying degrees of curiosity and concern. Then, Elena Thompson entered the room, and everything changed. She wore her dress uniform, navy blue with crisp creases and ribbons that told the story of her service in a language most civilians couldn't read. The Bronze Star was prominently displayed, along with the Purple Heart and several other commendations that spoke of courage under fire. Her bearing was military straight, her expression calm but alert, like a soldier preparing for battle.
The room fell silent as she surveyed the assembled group.
Her gaze lingered on Richard Morrison for a moment, taking his measure with the same cool assessment she had once used to evaluate potential threats in hostile territory. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people unconsciously straighten in their chairs. "I'm Sergeant First Class Elena Thompson, United States Army, recently retired.
I believe we need to discuss my son's educational environment."
Principal Williams cleared his throat nervously.
"Yes, well, thank you for coming, Miss Thompson. As I explained on the phone, there have been some incidents involving students that we need to address."
"Incidents," Elena repeated, the word carrying a weight of meaning that made Jake Morrison sink lower in his chair.
"Is that what we're calling harassment and vandalism now?"
Richard Morrison shifted uncomfortably.
"Look, Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're upset about some teenage drama, but boys will be boys.
Kids can be cruel sometimes, but they usually work these things out among themselves." Elena turned to face him directly, and Marcus saw something flicker in her eyes that reminded him of photographs he had seen of predators in the wild. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, "your son has spent the better part of this school year systematically humiliating my child. He has made assumptions about our family based on our economic situation, he has vandalized school property with slurs directed at my son, and yesterday he implied that military service is something people do when they can't do anything else." The last part was delivered with such quiet fury that the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Now wait just a minute," Richard Morrison started, but Elena held up a hand that stopped him mid-sentence.
"I'm not finished."
She reached into a folder she had been carrying and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "This is my military record, Mr. Morrison.
3 tours in Afghanistan. 47 combat missions.
I've been shot, blown up, and nearly killed more times than I care to count, all in service of my country and the freedoms your family enjoys every day." She placed the folder on Principal Williams's desk with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silent room. "I have a Bronze Star for actions taken during a firefight in Kandahar province, where I saved the lives of 6 soldiers under my command. I have a Purple Heart for wounds received while protecting a convoy of humanitarian supplies. I have commendations for leadership, for valor, and for dedication to duty that would make your son's head spin if he were capable of understanding them." Jake Morrison had gone completely pale, staring at Elena as if she were some exotic and dangerous animal he had never encountered before. Elena continued, her voice never rising above conversational level but carrying the kind of authority that made generals listen. After my service, I chose to work security to support my family while pursuing my education. I chose night shifts so I could be available for my son during the day. I chose the school district because I believe in the power of education to change lives. She turned to look directly at Jake Morrison, who seemed to physically shrink under her gaze. What I did not choose, young man, was to have my sacrifice and my son's worth questioned by a privileged child who has never faced a real challenge in his life. Richard Morrison's face had turned an interesting shade of red. You can't come in here and lecture my son like some kind of drill sergeant. This is a school, not a military base.
Elena's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. You're absolutely right, Mr. Morrison. This is a school where children are supposed to learn important lessons about respect, tolerance, and the value of hard work. Perhaps your son has been absent those days. Principal Williams finally found his voice.
I think we all need to take a step back here and focus on resolving this situation constructively.
I agree, Elena said.
Which is why I'm prepared to make this very simple. She turned to address the room in general, but her words were clearly directed at Jake and his father. My son has the right to attend this school without harassment. He has the right to be treated with the same respect afforded to every other student, regardless of his family's economic situation. And I have the right to expect that the parents and administration of this school will ensure that those rights are protected. She paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. If these incidents continue, if my son is subjected to further harassment or discrimination, I will not hesitate to involve the school board, the superintendent, and, if necessary, the media. I think the local news stations would be very interested in a story about how the children of veterans are treated in this district. The threat was delivered with such calm professionalism that it took several seconds for its full impact to register. Richard Morrison looked like a man who had just realized he was standing in quicksand.
That won't be necessary, Principal Williams said quickly. I'm sure we can resolve this internally. Elena nodded graciously. I'm sure we can. Jake, I'd like you to look at me, please.
Jake Morrison reluctantly raised his eyes to meet hers, and Marcus saw something pass between them that was more communication than conversation. You have two choices, son, Elena said, her voice gentle but implacable. You can continue down the path you're on, trying to build yourself up by tearing others down, or you can choose to be better. You can choose to be the kind of person who lifts others up instead of pushing them down. She leaned forward slightly, and Jake instinctively leaned back.
I've seen what happens to bullies in the real world, Jake. They don't fare well.
The same entitled attitude that makes you feel powerful in high school will get you eaten alive in college, in the workplace, in life.
The choice is yours.
Jake Morrison nodded rapidly, looking like he wanted nothing more than to disappear into his chair.
Elena straightened up and turned to Principal Williams. I trust this matter will be resolved quickly and permanently? Absolutely, Mrs. Thompson.
You have my word.
Thank you.
Elena gathered her folder and moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at the room.
Oh, and, Mr. Morrison? The next time you feel tempted to dismiss someone's service to this country, you might want to remember that freedom isn't free. Someone always pays the price.
With that, she walked out, leaving behind a room full of people who were still trying to process what had just happened. Marcus followed his mother out of the building, his heart pounding with a mixture of pride and amazement. He had never seen anything like what had just occurred. His quiet, hard-working mother had transformed into a force of nature, commanding the room with an authority that had rendered Jake Morrison and his father speechless. "Mom," he said as they reached the car, "that was incredible." Elena smiled, and, for the first time in months, it reached her eyes.
Sometimes, sweetheart, you have to remind people who they're dealing with.
The next morning at school, Marcus noticed the change immediately. Students who had previously ignored him now nodded respectfully when he passed in the hallway. Jake Morrison and his crew avoided eye contact entirely, suddenly, fascinated by their phones whenever Marcus appeared. The graffiti had been scrubbed from his locker and replaced with a formal apology note that Principal Williams had clearly supervised. But the most significant change was in Marcus himself. He walked taller, spoke more confidently, and no longer felt the need to apologize for his existence. His mother had shown him something important, that worth wasn't measured by wealth or social status, but by character and courage. She had also shown him that sometimes the best defense was a good offense, and that bullies only had as much power as you chose to give them. Sarah Mitchell approached him during lunch, smiling widely as she set her tray down across from him. "I heard about yesterday," she said without preamble.
The whole school is talking about it. Is it true your mom is some kind of war hero? Marcus thought about the question for a moment.
"She's a hero," he said finally. "The war part is just one chapter of her story."
That's amazing.
I wish I could have seen Jake Morrison's face when she walked into that room in her uniform. It was pretty unforgettable, Marcus admitted. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah looked up from her sandwich.
"You know what the best part of all this is?" "What?"
"You're finally acting like yourself. I mean, I didn't really know you before, but I could tell you were holding back somehow. Like you were afraid to take up space." Marcus considered her words.
"I guess I was.
I spent so much time trying not to attract attention that I forgot I had the right to be here just as much as anyone else."
Your mom reminded you of that?" "My mom reminded me of a lot of things. About the difference between earning respect and demanding it. About the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's scary.
About the fact that some fights are worth having."
Sarah nodded thoughtfully.
"My dad always says that how you handle adversity reveals who you really are."
Your dad sounds smart.
He is. I think he and your mom would get along really well. As if on cue, Jake Morrison walked past their table, his head down and his shoulders hunched. He looked diminished somehow, as if the previous day's confrontation had deflated him like a punctured balloon. Marcus felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for his former tormentor.
"Do you think he learned anything from all this?" Sarah asked, following Marcus's gaze.
Marcus thought about Elena's words to Jake, about choices and consequences and the difference between building yourself up and tearing others down. "I hope so," he said finally.
"Everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were yesterday."
That afternoon, as Marcus waited by the flagpole for his mother to pick him up, he reflected on everything that had changed in just a few days. The same students who had once whispered behind his back now treated him with respect. Teachers who had previously seen him as just another quiet kid now recognized something special in him. Most importantly, he had rediscovered his own voice and the courage to use it. When Elena pulled up in their old Honda Civic, Marcus no longer saw a symbol of their modest circumstances. Instead, he saw reliable transportation owned by a woman who had served her country with distinction and continued to serve her family with unwavering dedication. The car might not be fancy, but it belonged to them, earned through honest work and maintained through careful stewardship.
"How was school today?" Elena asked as he climbed into the passenger seat.
"Different," Marcus said with a smile.
"Good, different. I'm glad to hear that." "And, Marcus?" "Yeah, Mom? I want you to remember something important. What happened yesterday wasn't just about putting Jake Morrison in his place. It was about you learning to value yourself the way I value you. You are not defined by other people's opinions or prejudices. You are defined by your character, your choices, and your willingness to stand up for what's right." Marcus nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones like concrete foundations. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart. Now, how about we stop at that bookstore you like? I think it's time we added some new stories to our collection." As they drove toward downtown, Marcus thought about the future with an optimism he hadn't felt in years. College applications that had once seemed impossible now felt achievable. Dreams that had been buried under layers of shame and self-doubt were beginning to resurface. Most importantly, he no longer felt like he was fighting the world alone. He had learned that sometimes the strongest people were those who had been tested by fire and emerged with their values intact. He had learned that true strength wasn't about intimidating others, but about having the courage to be vulnerable and authentic.
And he had learned that he came from a long line of fighters, not because they looked for trouble, but because they were willing to stand up when trouble came looking for them. The old Honda Civic might not have been much to look at, but, as it carried them toward their next chapter, Marcus couldn't have been prouder to be riding in it. After all, it belonged to them, and they belonged to each other, and that was more valuable than all the status symbols in the world.